nasty things to the media, and he says, few professions I respect more. How was that taken?
Well, I think people were kind of surprised by it because just a couple hours before, he was actually bashing the media in a tweet, as he tends to do almost day to day. And here he was in this crowd, and it wasn't just that. Earlier in the evening, Mitch Landrieu made an impassioned plea. Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, made this impassioned plea for the importance of an independent press. And Trump had this smile on his face, and he started clapping. And I think that was the first sign that people had, okay, he's going to say something that is actually praiseworthy about the media and recognizes its importance.
Yeah, I think that's important for you to point out, Chris, that it happened. And I think I actually take him at his word, although I do have some skepticism about that, given other things he says and other things he does. And here's why. I totally agree with you. I think he says things for effect. I think it's a play. I think it's a show. But he has failed to understand that he is an institution. He's not just Donald Trump anymore. He's the president of the United States. And when the president speaks, it's an institution speaking. That's why it's so dangerous and counterproductive when he says things that attack a free press. So I'm happy to know that he said the other night, but that's where we have to keep our attention focused.
Well, as Wilbur Ross said, it's what he believes until he says something else. And whatever he says last, that's what it will be. So we'll play it like that way. Hey, Ted, good to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
D. Greg, as always, appreciate it. The word chaos, we use it a lot lately to describe what's going on in the West Wing, and that's not because that's what we think. That's because that's what is said by so many people who are working there and around that move. So we're going to get the inside story from Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. What does he have to say about this? Let's get after it. The White House insists chaos, no chaos inside the West Wing. But last week, we saw the president's communications director and close confidant resign, Jared Kushner's security top secret clearance stripped, and fighting back reports that his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, is leaving soon, and maybe his economic advisor as well. So how bad are things inside the White House? Let's get a fresh take from former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. He's currently the chief strategist for America First Action. Corey, thank you for taking the opportunity to come on the show.
Good morning, Chris.
It's good to have you. Let me ask you one step sideways for a second before we get to the political intrigue. This Axios report that they took a look at a subpoena that supposedly was given to a witness who's going to go before Mueller, and it was asking people to preserve all of their electronic communications from about 2015 with this long list of Trump people. You were on that list in terms of people they want communications captured with. What do you make of that subpoena?
Well, I think it's probably standard protocol for the Mueller investigation to see if there was any collusion or cooperation or coordination, which we know there wasn't. But what they want to do is they want to look and see any communication between staffers that potentially they would be interested in. And my guess is this is information that the Mueller team would already have access to. I am sure, and the campaign has been very clear about this, they have cooperated with the Mueller investigation in any way, shape, or form, and any electronic communication between potential individuals that were associated with the campaign that were done on the campaign communication network would have been preserved already, and I'm sure the Mueller investigative team already has those.
When you say we know, you, of course, are open to the idea that we don't know, right? We only know what Mueller's able to show in the end. I mean, you've said in the past you can't know about all the different things that Mueller's looking at. You weren't privy to all these different communications. You weren't part of all the different dynamics that have been exposed already. So you're not 100% sure of that, are you?
Well, I'm only sure of what I am familiar with as it relates to Corey Lewandowski, and I know that I didn't coordinate or cooperate or. But
there are a lot of other people at play. You're only one on a very long list of people they're looking at.
You're exactly right, Chris. You're exactly right. And what I've said and what I mean, and I've been very clear about this, if anybody attempted to influence our U.S. election system by coordinating or cooperating with an outside source to materially change the outcome of this election, those people should be in jail for the rest of their lives. And if that's what Bob Mueller finds, is that people were trying to do that, we've seen they've indicted 13 Russians. If they have found individuals who are trying to impact the outcome of an election from the U.S. here, those people need to go to jail. Our democracy is too sacred.
All right, next point. 22 folks, staffers, talk to the Washington Post, say it's crazy in here in the White House. It's hard. It's dysfunctional. We're having a hard time. Our morale is down. We can't get things done. What do you say?
Well, look, I love the sources that aren't willing to go on the record, and I think if people want to complain about their jobs, and let me tell you this, I don't work in the White House. I've never worked in the White House, but it is an extremely difficult environment under any circumstances. And if you go back and you talk to our friends who've worked there in the past, regardless of the administration, the 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, constant barrage is very difficult. But look, it is an amazing privilege, I think, to be able to serve our country by working in the White House. And if people don't want to work there, they should leave, because this job, being the administration, is bigger than any one staff person. And if you don't think that you're in the right position, do yourself and the president and the country the service that they deserve and leave, and not go on, on the record or on background with 22 sources who say it's chaos. If you don't like it, you can leave. It's a free country to still do that.
Right, but why not look at it the other way and think about what the culture is in there and who is engendering that culture, and maybe that should be addressed. Maybe chaos isn't a great working theory for the business of government. Maybe there is something to what is being talked about by Scaramucci and others, that the chief of staff has created a culture in there that is making a lot of people feel down in the mouth. You think there could be something to that?
Well, what I think is, if I look back in the last year, it wasn't that long ago where everyone says that White House was in chaos because the Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner triumvirate at the top, and no one could understand who the boss was. No one's saying they don't know who the boss is anymore. They know that John Kelly is the chief of the staff, and he's running the staff in that way. But what I don't understand is, there was chaos 7 months ago when it was a freewheeling, everybody had access to the White House, to the president, and now it's chaos because everything is controlled and buttoned up and there's a process. So I don't think you can have it both ways. Do I think that people say, hey, I want it one way or the other, or maybe you're somewhere in between? Possibly, but you can't make the argument on both sides. And I think what you've seen here is that John Kelly has put in process, a process in place where people have to report through a specific line. And I know some people don't like that.
Do you think that if he pulls, well, he did pull, Kushner's security clearance, do you see that as an indication that he and maybe the president's daughter may not be long for the West Wing?
I don't see that. I think Jared and Ivanka will have the opportunity to stay inside the West Wing for as long as they want to. But let me say this, when you look back at a number of people who didn't have their access to a top secret security clearance, there is a rationale for understanding that there has to be a process in place to make sure that people should have access to the right type of clearances for our own country. And we saw a problem in the White House a few months back where an individual who shouldn't have been there continue to have access to information, and that was a failure somewhere.
Who are you talking about?
I think Jared and Ivanka will have...
You're talking about Rob Porter.
Clearly.
Do you think Kelly knew about
that? That's exactly right. No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
How did they not know, Corey?
Just works from what they told me.
Yeah, but think about it. If you were there, you worked on the campaign. You know about accountability at the top. The FBI knew this. You knew they were delivering information to the counsel's office. How do you not know? It's not like somebody said he had traffic tickets.
No, Chris, somebody knew. Somebody knew, and the question was, what did they know and how soon did they know it? But look,
so how are we supposed to take it, Corey? Because this is a big part that gets us into this fugazi fake news and the media is so bad BS spin that'll come out of the White House. Somebody knew. You just said it yourself. And we all know that that's the truth. This isn't the kind of information nobody pays attention to. Gossip is like 50% of the job down there in terms of learning about who you're working with and their vulnerabilities. So we say, well, obviously somebody knew. So let's get after it and figure out who was it. Was it Kelly? Was it this one? Did Hope Hicks? Should she have been involved with it? Does this go all the way to the president? And those questions all get attacked as being unfair. But isn't all of that scrutiny totally legitimate when you have someone this close to the president handling all the things that the president is going to have to sign off on? Weren't those all legitimate questions?
There's some clear legitimacy to those questions, and if you look at what the House Oversight Committee is now doing, is they're investigating the administration to understand how that process broke down and why it failed, and that's the right thing to do right now. So Trey Gowdy has asked very clearly for an understanding of what the process was, who knew what, when, and where, and I think he's going to get to the bottom of it, and that's a very fair thing for him to do to make sure that the people who need and are required to have access to top secret information have that with with the best of their ability and the best understanding possible, and I think that's what the House is going to look into.
If the president were to say to you, Corey, I think I'm going to let Jared just see this stuff. I'm going to show him my briefing every day anyway. I don't care what they say. I trust him. What would you advise him?
Well, the president has 100% authority.
I know, but what would you advise him? It's not about having the right to do it. It's about whether or not it would be right to do it. What would you tell him?
Chris, what I think is the access of information that the president has and who he can grant that to is very selective. And if he wants to grant access to someone so they can look at something specific, so in their particular role in the building, they should have the opportunity to do that. And what we know, that he needs to have access to in order to continue in that capacity, and the president feels comfortable giving that to him so that he can help achieve that goal, then he should have the opportunity to do it. But that is completely at the discretion of the president in a limited basis, and that I know of, and the president's very clear, he gave John Kelly, the chief of staff, the ability to decide what was going to happen on the clearances, and John Kelly has made that decision.
Under the category of chaos, we look at these tariffs. I understand, you understand what Trump's disposition is in terms of muscling up and then falling back on a position. But tariffs are a very dangerous thing to do that with, and that's why he really took people by surprise the way he came out of this. This isn't what his advisors wanted. People were telling him it isn't the intelligent way to do this. You got to let us get people on board with it. He blew all that away and just went out with it, and now he's going to have to try to negotiate his process through Twitter. Was this the right move?
Well, I think, Chris, if you go back and you look at the campaign, which is now almost 2 years ago, he'd been talking about the need for tariffs for a long time. So, the reports that the staff wasn't aware of it, I think are somewhat untrue. There was a report listed just today that, a few weeks ago there was a meeting in the Oval Office between 5 or 6 people who discussed this opportunity and whether or not to impose tariffs. So this notion that the staff hadn't been aware of it, I think, is factually inaccurate. But what I do think is very important is this president has said, if this is going to help Americans have more jobs, meaning we're going to have manufacturing here in the country, that's a pledge he made during the campaign.
Right.
And now that he's fulfilling that promise, should not be a surprise to anyone.
Right, but how's he fulfilling the promise with tariffs? See, that's the point. You want to cut new trade deals, go ahead. Tariff is not a deal. It opens you up to retaliation. We've never seen it work in the past. Now he's going at Canada and Mexico. No one's saying that this goal is a bad goal to have more jobs. It's whether or not this is the right method. To the name of your book, Let Trump Be Trump. Yeah, when Trump is doing something that's good for everybody else, you think this is an example of where he should have listened to his advisors?
Well, I think he did listen to some of the advisors. I think he listened to Wilbur Ross. I think he listened to Peter Navarro. And what they said was the section that of the U.S. Code, which the president is using, right, Section 232, from what I understand, is a national security issue. And the president's position has been, if we don't have a steel industry and we don't have an aluminum industry here in the United States, it presents a national security problem. God forbid we ever have a serious conflict. And that's where he's doing this under. Now, does that give us the opportunity to go back? And what he tweeted today was, let's go back and renegotiate NAFTA so that it can be fair to the United States. That's a fair thing. And let's just look at it for 1 second. The tariff that he's talking about, particularly as it relates to aluminum, is a cost of, and the New York Times wrote this story, so this isn't the right-wing propaganda. It's 1 cent on every beer can that you're going to. So you buy a 6-pack of beer, it costs you 6 cents more if and only if they use 100% of the domestic aluminum available. If they continue to use recycled aluminum, right, which is about 80% of what a beer can is made of, it's a half of 1 cent on a can. So are U.S. citizens willing to pay 3 cents more for a 6-pack of beer to create aluminum manufacturing jobs in the U.S.? I think the answer is yes.
Well, but that's not the metric. The metric will be, how does the market respond? How do your trade partners respond? And what does that do in terms of putting pressure on U.S. labor? We'll have to see how it plays out if it actually happens. Corey Lewandowski, appreciate you taking the opportunity. Appreciate your perspective.
Thank you, Chris.
Erica.
President Trump says North Korea wants...
Is President Trump doing enough to prevent Russia from meddling again in the 2018 election? The intelligence community says they are the midterms that we're looking at. They say those are at risk. And they aren't getting any directives from the president to combat it. So it seems the answer is no. Let's get some deeper perspective from Richard Clark. He served as President George W. Bush's point person on cybersecurity and was the national coordinator for security and counterterrorism for both Presidents Bush and Clinton. Good to see you again, sir. I like the beard.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
All right, so we keep hearing, and please tell me what's not true in any of the premise here, that nothing's being done that the congressional committees are looking at it. Yes, the NSA and different parts of the intelligence community are always in an ongoing battle that takes place digitally as well as in different for fighting against America's enemies. That's always going on. But that's specific to the election meddling. There is no program in place. There is no strategy. What's your take?
Well, Chris, for any of the presidents I worked for, if there were a major threat to the United States, to our democracy, the president would have asked for and personally got involved in crafting a comprehensive program. This president hasn't done that. And yeah, the government does sort of work on automatic pilot on some issues. But for some things, the president has to give an order. And for NSA and Cyber Command and CIA to do some things covertly in cyberspace to stop the kind of attacks that are still ongoing with the Russian bots and Russian trolls trying to make America argue against itself, trying to create discord in the United States. For that kind of counter program to happen, the president has to give an order. He hasn't done it. And I think there's a very clear reason why he hasn't done it, and why, after Congress overwhelmingly approved new sanctions on Russia, he refuses to implement them. And the reason, I think, is inescapable. It is that he believes the Russian activity benefits him politically.
How so?
Well, the very same bots that helped get him elected are still out there. The organization that did it is still out there. And they are still supporting his causes. They are still making dissent likely in the United States, pretending to be Black Lives Matter groups, pretending to be pro-gun groups. They're whipping up dissent. They're whipping up discord. And on every issue in cyberspace and the social media forums, these Russian bots are still backing him. Why are they still allowed to do that? Why hasn't NSA or Cyber Command attacked their computers, which they could do with existing technology? They could do it easily. They could fry all of those computers. They could take down the so-called Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. But they haven't, because they need an order to do so. And that order has not been forthcoming.
So let's take a step further down that road. You know, we saw Vladimir Putin come out with a video presentation last week where these supposed missiles they have that can go anywhere in the world, and the target he chose was Florida, and it looked like they were headed right for Mar-a-Lago. And the president said nothing about that. Why would Putin antagonize a guy that he's trying to help, and why would the president say nothing when he's so easily provoked and he goes after our allies with such a low standard, but nothing when the guy targets his house with missiles?
Well, I think you can guess. The president has never really criticized Putin. He likes Putin. He says he admires Putin. You're not going to hear him criticize Putin no matter what he does. Imagine any other president. Imagine Ronald Reagan or George Herbert Walker Bush. If the leader of Russia gave a anti-American speech with pictures of missiles attacking the United States, could you imagine them being silent under those circumstances? But this president is silent.
North Korea. We have word that South Korean officials are up there. There is parley with North Korean officials in North Korea. Supposedly the goal is to bring the United States into dialogue with the North. And there's this political intrigue where the president said North Korea reached out to me to want to talk. I said, you've got to de-nuke first. And North Korea laughs off that suggestion. What's your take on the state of play?
Chris, of all the issues the president is dealing with, this is the most dangerous. This could, if mishandled, result in a war in which perhaps millions of people would die, and perhaps even people in the United States, certainly Americans in Korea. So we have to be very, very careful how we handle this. And so the president to say, I'm not going to talk unless you completely capitulate before the talks even begin, is a very dangerous path. We need to be in discussion with North Korea. We need to find some compromise. Because 2 weeks ago in Pearl Harbor, the American military commanders conducted what was called a tabletop exercise for a war in Korea. And they were horrified by what they saw would happen. It's a terrible outcome out there, and it could happen this year if we're not careful. We have to do everything we can to avoid that, and talking without precondition is one of those things. And so far, the president has said he will only talk if North Korea says, yeah, we'll give up our nuclear weapons program. Now let's talk. They're not going to do that.
Richard Clark, thank you so much. It is great to have your perspective on the show. It's good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chris.
Eric.
They may surprise you.
The Florida Senate will vote today on a bill to tighten gun laws in the state after the massacre that killed 17 students and teachers nearly 3 weeks ago. The proposal raises the age to buy a gun to 21 years old, bans bump stocks, and gives districts the option to arm teachers who would be trained to carry a firearm. The Senate rejecting a ban on assault weapons. Joining me now is Andrew Pollack, who lost his daughter Meadow in the attack. Thanks for joining us again today.
Hey, good morning.
First,
I'd like to get a word out. I just want everyone that believes in my crusade and wants to help to follow me at remembermeadow.com, remembermeadow.com. Okay, go ahead.
Meadow, of course, your daughter, and it is, and I'm glad you brought that up on the top because it's so important not to forget every single life that was
I'm not going to forget.
That is for sure. This has understandably changed the trajectory of your life. One of the things that I know is most important to you now is school safety. So as we look at this proposal in Florida today that is expected to pass, does it do enough for you in terms of school safety?
Yes, it does. I went over it. The proposal that Rick Scott put together, it's going to help. It's going to help the state. It's going to help all the kids, and we're going to take it. We're going to set the example in Florida, so other states could follow. That's why, to me, it's so important that this bill gets passed.
And do you believe
I don't want to stop in Florida. I'm not going to be the parent that stopped. I'm going to be the parent that's going to take it from here to the Pacific Coast. I'm never going to quit until every governor knows how important this is to me and how I have to feel every single day that my kid's gone.
What is it specific?
They're going to feel the pain.
And what is it, specifically in terms of the measures here, that you believe is making schools safer and that you want to see replicated in other states?
Okay, there's like three parts to the bill. One part of the bill gives the police the authority to confiscate a weapon if they think the person's acting irrationally. So they'll say you look outside and your neighbor's acting nutty. You'll be able to call the police department. They could go out. They could evaluate this person. They'll be able to Baker Act this person, and then they could search his house, and they'll be able to take his weapons from him. They didn't have that ability before. So that's one of the measures that's very important. A big part of the bill is mental illness. They'll be able to connect. The teachers are going to be connected and to communicate with the police department, DCF, and they're going to have counselors in each school working together to find kids that have problems before something like this happens. That's very important. And, people don't talk about it. They're going to be able to help these people from hurting themselves also and hurting others.
In terms of
That's another part of the bill.
In terms of reaching out in terms of mental illness. As you know, over the weekend, the part of the proposal to ban assault weapons was rejected. One of the students at Parkland tweeting that it breaks her heart, but we will not let this ruin our movement, saying this is for the kids, never again. What's your reaction to that?
Right there, it should tell them, I'd like to talk to the kids. I understand their pain, the children, but that's an example where their efforts are going in the wrong direction right at this moment. My kid was murdered in that school, so there's no one that could feel the way I do. So I understand the children, and just by them seeing that didn't work, I want them to focus their energy on something that's achievable right now. Be productive in the country. Work with us. Let's make these schools safe, and once every school's safe in America, do what you have to with the gun laws. I got no problem with these kids going out and marching every day against guns. But right now, the focus for these kids and the parents of these kids to talk to them. Let's make the schools safe. That's what we need to do right now. So the kids are going to school Monday. The kids are going to go to school. Are they safe? When the judge goes to work, is he worried about someone coming in with guns? No, because they can't get in. When you go on a plane, you're not worried someone's going to come in and shoot you. So I'm here. I just want our kids to feel that safe. I want them to feel safe like the judge in the courtroom or like the politician when he walks into the federal building. We owe it to our kids for them to be as safe as who I mentioned.
And I know, as you've said, you believe that the starting place should be school safety, moving on from there. You've also said you don't feel it's achievable to get any federal law changes, so that's why that's your focus. You have spoken with the president,
though.
It
might be achievable down the road, but the battle right now is our schools being safe. And I think that's achievable at the moment. We need to be the first community that gets out there.
And in terms of getting that done, you've spoken with the president. You have implored him to act. How is the president helping you when it comes to school safety? What are you hearing from him in terms of a promise of help?
Well, he listened to me, but it's not up to him right now. It's up to us, the parents, the grandparents. We need to act. We don't need him. We could do it ourselves. But he's there. He's listening. I really appreciate him. He had my family. We've been to the White House twice. He flew us all in. We met with him one-on-one. He heard, he was I met with him as a concerned parent or grandfather. So he's listening and he's watching what's going on in Florida, and I'm going to reach out to him again once this bill gets passed.
And would you welcome his support after that? You're saying that you don't really need him right now. His support, obviously welcome, as you mentioned. But is there more you think he could do to help you and what you would like to see be done?
I was raised, my father always taught me, if you want something done, you do it yourself. And that's how I lived my whole life. So I'm out there doing it, and I know the president has my back. We've been, like I said, we've been there twice. He's waiting to see what happens in Florida. I got things going on. I got a lot of things happening, and we're not going to stop. And we need everyone just to group together. It's not about a political party. It's just about one party uniting the parents, the grandparents, the kids. We need the kids on board. With them, it's achievable quicker.
Andrew Pollack, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
And thanks to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Talk is next. For our U.S. viewers, New Day continues right now.
Americans are tired of being pushed around on the world stage when it comes to trade.
This trade wars and dividing us from our allies makes no sense.
If we have big trade deficit with our other partners, they have a lot more to lose than we do.
China is winning and we're losing with this tariff regime. You're making a huge mistake here.
The problem is the president has been ill-served by staff.
The drama is there. That process has gotten to good results.
The Me Too, the Time's Up movements, everyone is getting a voice to express something that has been happening forever.
Things are changing for the better. It is positive change.
I have two words to leave with you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Inclusion Rider.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning. Welcome to your New Day. Allison is off. Erica Hill joins me. Thank you for being here. Very good to have you. We begin with President Trump defending his decision to impose tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, despite fierce resistance from U.S. trading partners and top Republicans. The president is now tying those proposed tariffs to issues with our neighbors, Mexico and Canada. But GOP leaders fear a trade war would hurt them badly in the midterms.
The White House downplaying reports the president's chief economist is planning to leave over those tariffs, while the fate of the president's daughter and his son-in-law remains uncertain. With their roles reduced and powers limited, are they on the way out? We begin our coverage with Caitlin Collins live at the White House. Caitlin?
Well, good morning, Erica and Chris. President Trump appears to be welcoming the idea of a potential trade war and rebuffing the concerns of those U.S. allies who are worried about what the impact of these proposed tariffs will have. But according to the president, the United States has been, unquote, the losing end of these global trade deals for just too long.
The president was quite clear. We can't have a country that can defend itself and prosper without an aluminum and steel industry.
The Trump administration defending its stiff proposed tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, despite threats of retaliation from key American allies who will be disproportionately hurt by the policy.
Sure, there may well be some sort of retaliation, but the amounts that they're talking about are also pretty trivial.
White House advisor Peter Navarro telling CNN that at this point, the president isn't planning on issuing any exemptions.
As soon as you exempt one country, then you have to exempt another country. And so it's a slippery slope.
British Prime Minister Theresa May calling Mr. Trump Sunday to express deep concerns after officials from the European Union vowed to impose taxes on U.S. goods, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, and Levi's jeans. President Trump appearing undeterred, responding by threatening to tax European cars and tweeting, "Steel and aluminum industries are dead. Sorry, it's time for a change." But Mr. Trump's advisors appearing to leave room for the president to change his mind.
Whatever his final decision is what will happen. What he has said, he has said. If he says something different, it'll be something different. I have no reason to think he's going to change.
A number of Republicans speaking out publicly against the president's proposal.
This trade wars and dividing us from our allies makes no sense.
China is winning and we're losing with this tariff regime. You're letting China off the hook. You're punishing the American consumer and our allies. You're making a huge mistake here.
On the heels of a chaotic week in the West Wing, the president making light of the tumult at a closed-door black-tie dinner, telling attendees, "I like chaos. It really is good." Now the question everyone keeps asking is, who is going to be the next to leave? Steve Miller or Melania? And taking a jab at his embattled son-in-law, saying, quote, "Before I get started, I want to apologize for arriving a little bit late. You know, we're late tonight because Jared couldn't get through security." The president also joking that Vice President Mike Pence starts out each morning asking everyone, quote, "Has he been impeached yet?" Mr. Trump making light of China's decision to scrap presidential term limits in a conversation with donors Saturday.
He's now president for life. No, he's great. Look, he was able to do that. I think it's great. Maybe we'll have to give that a shot someday.
Now, Erica and Chris, the president and the first lady are going to welcome the prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, here to the White House today. And though there are...
I think we lost Caitlin's shot there.
Well,
but
she'll be back. I'm sure
will.
she's fine. We'll let you know if otherwise. Joining us now, David Gregory, CNN political analyst, and Ted Johnson, Variety's senior editor and Washington bureau chief. He was in the room when it happened during President Trump's speech at the Gridiron Club dinner. It's good to have you both. So, David, we have more meat on the bones of what's going on with the tariff. The president is up and tweeting, and it does seem, as expected, that these tariffs, in Trump's mind, are bait to bring people to the table and cut better deals. People will say, this is what he's a master of. What's the risk?
Well, let's just explain what he's suggesting there, because this caught my eye, saying that the tariffs only come off, only happen if we don't renegotiate NAFTA. Is that how you read it?
I don't. I read them as he's going to do it, and then if they want to come and talk about it, yeah, who cares what we think? Let me just read it. We have large trade deficits with Mexico and Canada. NAFTA, which is under renegotiation right now, has been a bad deal for the USA. Massive relocation of companies and jobs. Tariffs on steel and aluminum will only come off if new and fair NAFTA agreement is signed. Also, Canada must treat our farmers much better, highly restrictive. Right. Mexico must do much more on stopping drugs from pouring into the U.S. They have not done what needs to be done. Millions of people addicted and dying. So the question just becomes method. Is this the right way to achieve those goals?
So, but let's be clear that what he's suggesting is he's for the first time giving you a window when these tariffs go away, right? I mean, what the conditions are if they renegotiate NAFTA, which has been going on for a while, if there can be resolution with Canada. So, I mean, it's the first time we've seen the president, I think, flinch a little bit in the face of the criticism that's coming not just from abroad, but from conservatives, members of his own party, others like John Kasich, governor of Ohio, with a strong manufacturing base, saying that this is bad for the economy, bad for jobs, that it's not paying attention to the role that innovation has played in reducing our manufacturing base, and threatening not just financial markets, but what has been described as the synchronicity of growth, economic growth around the world. That's what the president has put in jeopardy with this move. And I thought Wilbur Ross over the weekend suggesting, too, this fluidity. This was a very hasty process of announcement, and now he's suggesting, well, maybe the president will change his mind. This is this unpredictability that perhaps the president very deliberately wants people to be sitting with and uncomfortable with.
Ted, is it flinching, though, or is it more the president, I won't say doubling down because he's already done that, a triple or quadruple at this point, and almost laying out more of a case? Well, let me just remind you here, since I didn't give you details last week, Ted, this is why I'm telling you I'm doing this. And even the point on Mexico, is that what he's trying to use to bring national security into the mix? Because we know that is supposed to be at play here based on the way that he wants to do these tariffs. This is all based on a 1962 trade law where he has to show that there's a threat to national security.
Yeah, what I'm seeing right now is Trump is playing his business instincts. He's viewing himself as, hey, this has worked for me in my own business. Why can't it work for the country? And this, as David said, is kind of a way of bringing, or his way of bringing, trying to bring Canada and Mexico to the table. The problem, as we've seen in the last couple of days, is it rattles others in the Republican Party, it rattles world leaders, and it rattles the markets. I think that the calculation in Trump's mind is that this is probably good politically, and this is good strategically, business-wise. But as we're seeing, I mean, we've never quite had a negotiator in office in this way before.
Right. We've also never seen tariffs pay off for the U.S. The way he's suggesting they would. Because, look, just one example of the concern about retaliation. Everybody keeps talking China, China, but they're not the main player when it comes to steel. Canada is. But Canada's not just the big producer, David. They're the big buyer of U.S. steel. I think it's 16% of the market that they send into the U.S., but it's 50% of what they buy up from our market. And that's an important number because Trudeau, who's no fan of Trump, could easily play this to political advantage as well and say, you know what? Why don't I slap a tariff on what you're bringing in here in terms of your steel? 50% of your market that we absorb. Now what happens?
Right. And steel producers in this country over the weekend were quite vocal about the idea that there's such integration between Canada and the United States in steel production and purchases that they should be exempted from this. The president making it clear, I think, this morning that he wants to use this as leverage in some of our trade disputes with Canada and certainly with Mexico as well when you think about NAFTA. The unpredictability is what I think a lot of businesses are concerned about here. They don't know how to plan and what the impacts are of this negotiating stance, if it's just that, or if it actually does develop into a trade war. And that's what the president's risking here. I'm not an economist. I won't presume to know more than I do about this, but that unpredictability that we're seeing in the markets and the broader economic growth is something that I think would deeply worry this president, who wants to be seen as somebody who's driving jobs and growth for the country.
And that unpredictability, of course, extends into the White House, as we know, which in many ways we were hearing last week is what brought this about, is all the chaos that is happening, all the consistent chaos, we should say, there in the White House. Ted, you were at the Gridiron Dinner over the weekend. We hear the president say in his remarks, I like chaos. Maybe not a surprise, but also poking fun, too. I mean, that line he had in particular about, sorry, we're late, Jared couldn't get through security, that's saying something. How did that play in the room?
Well, he got a lot of laughs for that line. The most controversial line was when he said, I like chaos, and then he said, oh, people are wondering who's going to be the next to leave. Is it going to be Steve Miller, or is it going to be Melania? There were some gasps in the audience, and then Trump immediately was like, okay, he turned to Melania and said, okay, we're okay, aren't we? You still love me, don't you? So he knew that was a pretty daring remark. You know, I can't help but think that Trump is a showman, and he loves this audience. And if you take a step back, this is the D.C. elite. This was a white tie event. It was a very formal event. You don't get more insiderish in D.C. than this event itself. Trump loved it, and it kind of goes against the whole idea that he came to Washington to drain the swamp. He even tweeted about it yesterday, saying how good of a time he actually had.
I think that's such a good point because, you know, in his war with the media, what people overlook is how much he loves the media, feeds off the media, and wants to be embraced by insiders, by the establishment. He wants to be accepted in this role as president of the United States, a place he may have been thinking about but never thought he would get. And the showman piece of it, as Ted, I think, so astutely says, his populism is a big part of his showmanship. So the notion that Donald Trump, whose lifeblood is the media, starting with the tabloid press in New York, would become some populist against the media is a joke.
Yeah. I mean, look, he has said, you know, I don't know why they love me, but boy, do I love them when he's talking about the base. Ted, you know what struck me? I actually tweeted this out to see if people picked up on this in this speech. We don't have it ready, but this is what he said. I have a lot of respect for the people in this room. The president said, fairness is important to me. You got your point of view. Some of you cover it squarely. There are few professions I respect more. He's talking about journalism. I want to thank the Gridiron Club, of course. I want to thank the press for all you do to support and sustain our democracy. I think it's important that people have to be able to pick up on this point, especially if they're Trump folk, if they're in his base. He says a lot of things for effect that he doesn't necessarily mean. Here he is at the Gridiron Club after all the nasty things to the media, and he says, few